Welcome to Executive Leaders Radio, your spot in the corner office, the radio show where executives share their secrets to success. Executive Leaders Radio.
You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohen, with my co-host, Shannon Lane, and Jeff Mack, Newmark Knight Frank, Drew Hanlon, Matthew Shapiro, Obermeyer, Frank Hennessy, Premier Planning, Daily Tipton, and Evolution Energy Partners, Mike Stefano Slack, Mike Wiley, Chain Solutions, and John Seitz, Mayo Sites. And Jeffrey, will you please give us a rundown of who our guests are today, please?
Sure, Herb. We have a great show. We have Bob Waller, President and CEO of Association Headquarters. Yasmine Mustafa is the CEO and co-founder of Roar for Good. Joe Cellucci, CEO, Managing Partner, Enable Consulting. And Rick Skidmore, President and CEO of Timberlane Shutters. Let's get to know our first guest, Bob Waller, President and CEO of Association Headquarters. Bob, what is Association Headquarters? What are you guys doing?
We're a professional service firm providing management and administrative support to nonprofit organizations.
How many nonprofit organizations do you support?
Currently over 40.
How large or how small is the team?
We're about 180 folks. Mount Laurel, small office in Alexandria, Virginia.
All right. Jeffrey.
So, Bob, we were talking in the green room about your mom and dad. How did mom and dad influence you getting into the nonprofit career?
Well, they both were very generous with their time in whether it was involved with the church, local community, garden club. It's just something I grew up with.
And what do you take mom or dad to work every day with you?
Just commitment, hard work. Both were very hardworking, weren't afraid to put in hard work, whether it was, putting up wallpaper or going to work every day.
Drew?
Bob, what were you into for fun as a youth?
Sports. I was a sports guy. I loved, played Pee-wee football, Pee-wee baseball. That was kind of what I enjoyed doing.
Didn't you tell us you worked with your father on something?
Yeah, when I was 10 years old, my parents bought a 150-year-old house that was 2 steps away from being condemned. So I started doing work with my hands at 10 years old.
Mm-hmm. And I know Drew's got another question there. So what was the upside of you working with your dad restoring this home? What'd you get from that?
Well, it was certainly my work ethic. Dad worked all day at his regular job, and then at night he'd come home and we'd work on the house. So it was definitely work ethic.
I know Drew's got some other questions there. Mr. Stefano.
Bob, you mentioned you played football. You mentioned you were the quarterback a little bit earlier. Tell us about that experience and what that meant to you.
Well, it was, again, football was always my sport, and I was kind of drawn to playing the quarterback. I think it was the fact that I liked being the leader, and certainly as quarterback, you're the kind of guy running the show on offense.
Mm-hmm. John? Mr. Seitz, there we go.
Bob, as a quarterback, you, I'm sure, endured challenges, both positive and negative. How did you deal with the challenges of failure as a quarterback, and then how did that help shape you as the leader of your company today?
Well, I think, again, I was not a very, very good team at all. So it was a matter of, taking the negative and making it into a positive. I mean, we were a team. We played as a team, and being able to take that now and work with my team and, and making sure that when things don't go well, that we can turn it around and make it into a positive.
Mm-hmm. Shannon?
You've been with Association Headquarters for over 32 years. It sounds like you were really loyal. Where did that loyalty first show up when you were a kid?
Well, it was my dad. My dad really stayed with the same company for over 40 years. And I'm lucky in that my day's never been the same since the day I started 32 years ago. So it's something that really it's a passion for me at this point.
Frank?
Bob, in your business, you talk about the importance of giving your clients a seat at the table to advance their cause. Think about when you were a kid, what was your seat at the table? What was your role interacting with your peers?
Well, whenever I got involved in organizations, whether it was a youth group or church, various different volunteers, I was always wanting to be kind of the leader. In many cases, I was elected president by my peers to run that particular organization, and it just became very natural to me.
How does that carry over in your work with nonprofits?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic. The company is a for-profit, but all the clients are nonprofits. So it's being involved with organizations that all give back to society is very rewarding.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Wiley?
Bob, Little League football helped shape kind of my identity as a child and as a leader, right? So being the quarterback of a football team, I mean, it clearly is a correlation. To what extent would you say that that's kind of helped launch your career in leadership?
Well, I think a lot of it is, obviously operating under pressure, being able to rally a team in a single, cause is something that, carries through from then until now.
Mm-hmm. Daly?
So you talked about your company working with nonprofits, and how do you give back?
Well, I volunteer a lot of my time. The company, we have a social responsibility committee, so we do habitat builds. So I love getting up on roofs and fixing things and give black blood. We do a lot of community service as a company, and I love getting involved with all of them.
Mm-hmm. Matthew Shapiro.
Tell me about Father Councilman's impact on you in childhood.
Yeah, he became the head pastor at our church when I was a teenager, and part of his responsibility was working with the youth group. I was the president of the youth group at the time, and he and I, again, it was his first full-time position, so we kind of learned together and developed a real good bond, and just a really good person, and it was something I think I carry through.
Did he make you the president of the peer group, or did your friends do that?
Yeah, it was a peer kind of election type of process.
Why'd they pick you?
Again, I think I was the guy that, spoke up more often than anybody else, so they figured they'd give me the job.
Give me an example of when you spoke up.
Well, part of our responsibility as a youth was to do things around the church and everything, needed. We did pancake breakfasts and it was, I kind of helped guide what we were doing and helping work with the group as to what we wanted to get done.
What's all that got to do with who you are today?
Well, it's just that I guess the one thing that he instilled in me was, again, as I've already said, being a good person and having a high level of empathy for my staff as well as others.
What does that mean to be a good person?
But one of the things I like to say is, you can never be wrong for doing the right thing. And that's something that I live by in all aspects of my life, whether it's raising my children or certainly working with the company.
Mm-hmm. Bob, I'm curious when, just to take us back to when you and your dad were working together on the house, what, do you remember your dad like showing you, or like, what did you get from that experience?
Well, a lot of things. Patience certainly was one. He was a very patient person. A lot of just little things. He unfortunately wasn't a big believer in power tools, so he did a lot of it manually. So I kind of learned how to do a lot of things from kind of the base up, which I think has helped in the way I address a lot of.
When you're faced with a tough situation at the office today, like what do you hear your dad telling you?
My dad was always one very calm. He never got upset, rarely ever, cursed, never lost his cool. So I think that's something that I carry with me is his ability to just stay calm.
Mm-hmm. Jeffrey?
Bob, in the green room, we were talking a little earlier about our kids and my grandchildren. What have you learned from your children that you work with in your company today? What have your kids taught you?
Well, it's, again, my oldest is 23. I've got an 18-year-old and a 14-year-old. So, just the ability to work with them, listen to them and kind of listen to what they're dealing with in their day-to-day lives helps me understand better the folks that I'm working with, some of the younger staff, and recognizing the challenges and how they're approaching life very differently than certainly I did at that age.
Bob, I understand that you did what's called a management buyout at one point of this business. It sounds to me like that ability of yours to step up to the plate like you did with the president of the youth group and in football as the quarterback, it's sort of the role you ended up assuming with this business. Am I correct about that or mistaken?
No, you're right, Herb. I never expected to be an entrepreneur, and I never expected to be running a company of, almost 200 people.
But it has to do with your wanting this and your ability to step up and lead the charge. Yes? No?
I think certainly when the opportunity came up, I had now, of course, 2020 hindsight, had the good sense to make the right decision and take the next step.
What's the website address for your organization?
Associationheadquarters.com.
Let me have that one more time.
Associationheadquarters.com.
We've been speaking with Bob Waller, President and CEO of Association Headquarters here on Executive Leaders Radio. Don't forget to visit our website. It's executiveleadersradio.com to learn more about our executive leaders. And we'll be back in a moment right after this quick break. Don't go away. And your name and organization is?
Jeff Mack. I'm a commercial real estate broker with Newmark Knight Frank.
And how do you suggest businesses handle coming back to work with this pandemic stuff?
Herb, what we're doing first with tenants is meeting with the landlord to find out what they're doing to prepare the building for tenants coming back. Lobbies, elevators, lavatories, and cleaning specifications, and also the air conditioning system.
So it sounds to me like you're taking a pretty thorough approach. Well, you're known as the man in commercial real estate in the greater Philadelphia area. It sounds like you're taking a pretty thorough approach in terms of helping your clients as tenants come back into their workspaces, as well as understand all the variables?
We've been helping them prepare by doing work from home surveys, finding out what the risks are for each of the employees, and also doing a risk overlay of their floor plan to find out where the trouble spots are and where those risk areas
Website
lie.
Address?
NewmarkKnightFrank.com, COVID-19.
This has been your Business Spotlight. We're back. You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohen, and we'd like to introduce Yasmine Mustafa, CEO and co-founder of Roar for Good. Yasmine, what is Roar for Good? What are you guys doing?
We are a workplace safety company protecting vulnerable workers, starting with hospitality and soon to be healthcare. Excellent.
Frank.
Yasmine, your business is all about creating opportunities for the vulnerable. Were you vulnerable growing up?
People say I have an interesting background. I came over as a refugee of the Persian Gulf War, completely by happen chance. My brother was American, so 2 U.S. ambassadors burst through a bomb shelter where we're at to grab him, and we got to come along. Coming to America was also difficult. I didn't speak any English. I didn't have a social network. I didn't know the culture. So that was also tough. When I was 15 applying for college, I learned I was undocumented. My paperwork had not been submitted and the clock had restarted. And then when I was 18, my father ended up leaving the family, taking all the savings, all the family savings with him. So most of my life I spent vulnerable.
So personality-wise, what did you learn from that to help motivate you to be so tenacious?
Personality-wise? Well, I would say for a very long time, up until I became an American citizen 8 years ago, I really felt like I didn't have any power. I didn't have an identity. I didn't have a voice. I didn't belong. So it was all that I wanted. And as soon as I became a U.S. citizen, I seized those traits I didn't have.
How does that inspire you to create inclusive opportunities today?
Well, my company is all about protecting vulnerable women, mostly women of color, immigrants, undocumented. In many ways, I feel like it is self-healing because it's protecting the women like me that might not have had those opportunities.
Shannon?
Yasmine, what does it mean to you to be able to give power to the women that you're helping at Roar?
Again, it feels very self-healing. In many ways, I feel like I am healing the young Yasmine that didn't have that power.
Drew?
Yeah, speaking of the young Yasmine, I'm just curious. It's obvious you're a fighter, Yasmine. I'm just curious what your advice might be to a young lady, 10 to 12 years old, that's struggling or facing some challenges.
My advice would be to focus on what you can control. As an 8, 9, 10-year-old, there isn't that much. For me, it was really education. I poured myself into books and learning because I thought that at least there I can excel, and I had the control to excel.
Jeffrey?
You mentioned a college professor in the green room. What was the influence and turning point for you that you learned from your college professor?
His name was Chris Pavlidis. He ran the Entrepreneurship Institute at Temple University. And I don't know what he saw in me, but I just remember walking into his office, telling him about my latest idea, and him being very patient and open and dissecting it in a way that was more full of praise and critique, something I had not been used to. But I still remember the moment that he told me he believed in me, something that I had never heard before.
How did you feel at that moment?
Well, I cried. It was really impactful because my life growing up wasn't focused on praise. It was critique. So it really meant a lot to me.
Mr. Wiley?
Yes, your story is fascinating and it's inspiring for a lot of us, but I'm curious how you can still remain selfless and empathetic having gone through some of the experiences you've had.
Well, I think those experiences made me resilient. I think that because of those experiences, I am someone that is very, very quickly able to pick myself up when times are down. Like with COVID, we're in the hospitality industry. We have been the most severely impacted industry as a result of everything that's going on. And because of my upbringing, I thrive in chaos. I work really well under pressure. I and my management team were able to quickly pivot and adapt. So I think focusing on what I can do as a result of many times not being able to do so is how.
Matthew?
Yasmine, how young were you when you came to America?
I was 8 years old.
And what impact did the 8 years before you came here in war, what impact did that have on you? What do you remember from that?
I remember a lot of chaos. I remember a lot of confusion. It was not a good time. I remember my parents being really scared. Something I've never seen fear in them until that moment.
What did that do you seeing fear in your parents?
What was that?
What did that do to you seeing fear in your parents?
It made me scared.
And you've come so far from there to a point where you are now. Can you tell us what's your reputation now among the entrepreneurial community around here?
I would say I'm seen as an activist, especially for immigrants and refugees. I feel like the token woman entrepreneur, to be perfectly honest. But Herb says I have a good reputation, so I'll just go off of what he said earlier.
Why do they see you as a role model? Why are you seen as a role model, Yasmine?
You have to ask them, Herb. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I think it's because of all the stuff we've been previously talking about that you're still standing up and trying to help others. Mr. Stefano?
Yasmine, you mentioned you were the second of 8 in your family. What do your brothers and sisters do? What's the common thread between your family?
5 out of 5 of my siblings, or actually 4 out of the 6, so 4 siblings are all entrepreneurs. So they've started their own businesses.
And are they relatively successful?
Yeah, 2 of them are brand new. One of them just opened a facial bar on 13th and South and already made best of.
Why so many entrepreneurs in the family? Why do you think that happened?
Well, one of the things that's fascinating about immigrants is they are more likely to start businesses. And I believe a big part of that is when you don't have any opportunities, you create them themselves. And one of those is starting a business. Perfect. John?
Yasmine, you had you told us you had a very, what we would call an untraditional childhood, yet you have an entrepreneurial spirit and you've developed a leadership team around you. How have you done that? Have you drawn anything from your childhood? How have you developed your leadership team around you?
Yeah, I would say a lot of it was the absence of what I didn't have. So I'm very lucky in that my leadership team outside of one individual was not handpicked. They actually came to me. They either heard me speak at an event or heard about our company and what we're doing and very drawn to the mission and purpose of the company. We don't just talk the talk, we walk the walk. We're a certified B Corp. So I think seeing that we're not a traditional company, that we are a company that wants to make a difference made it easier to recruit the leadership team and what's really amazing about them. So my 3 management team members have been with me pretty much almost from the beginning. And I recently actually just made them co-founders.
Daily?
They're really passionate about the vision and the mission.
So we in the green room, we talked a little bit about Kuwait, and I actually was there for the liberation of Kuwait, and I was can really relate to your story. And you talk about the person that said that they believe in you. How do you deliver that back to the people you work with? How do you feel when that happens?
That's a really good question. One of the things I struggle with is because I grew up where critique was more common than praise. I feel like I still have that voice in the back of my head that's more full of critique, what's not going well versus what's going right. So it's one of the things I've been working on rewiring my brain on versus coming at a situation or something that's happened and thinking about what could have been better, really focusing on what went well and praising those who did well.
And do you try to give that to the people you work with, the women you work with?
Absolutely. With my employees, and I'm much better at praising my employees and others than praising myself. I feel like most leaders are. It's a trait I seem to find.
Mm-hmm. Yasmine, what's the website address for your organization, Roar for Good?
roarforgood.com, roarforgood.com.
So we've been speaking with Yasmine Mustafa, who's a role model for other entrepreneurs in the greater Philadelphia area, CEO and co-founder of Roar for Good. Don't forget to visit our website. It's executiveleadersradio.com. That's executiveleadersradio.com to learn more about our executive leaders. And we will be back in a moment or two right after this quick break. Don't go away. We'll be right back. We're back. You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohen. We'd like to introduce a gentleman by the name of Joe Cellucci, who's the CEO and managing partner of Enable Consulting. Joe, what is Enable Consulting? What are you guys doing?
Thanks, Herb. We're an IT professional services organization, helping organizations swarm through the use of technology.
Jeffrey?
So, Joe, after the win at Cortec Consulting, you started Enable. Have you been involved in any other businesses in your career?
I've been a habitual entrepreneur. Jeff, you know me for a long time. I've got a healthcare business right now, and at the same time working and involved with other companies on boards and also participating for equity as part of our service exchange.
But why not go work for Merck or Pfizer? Why get involved in all these entrepreneurial endeavors?
I started in a large company, and I felt like I was captive in a cage without an ability to move and use, my creativity. At least I think I have creativity. And I wanted to escape. So I escaped.
Drew?
Joe, you've had multiple technology companies. I'm just curious, do you remember as a youth messing around with computers or anything like that?
Well, you're going to date me, and I'll avoid being dated, but there was an old stereo in my parents' house that I tended to like to take apart and put back together. I guess that was my start.
Why did you do that?
Really nothing else to do. It was an activity indoors that I found fun, and I found a screwdriver.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Wiley?
Yeah, Joe, you'd mentioned that you're an only child. What other kind of things did you do as a kid growing up?
In the neighborhood, taking advantage of local, friends networks, a ping pong table in my parents' house, which was a place where we gathered and spent time. Individual golf was an interest for me as well.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Stefano?
You mentioned when you were younger, you worked at a pharmacy. What did they hire you to do?
Well, they hired me to be a pharmacy technician. That was the role I started.
What did you end up doing?
Moving boxes, cleaning the pharmacy, doing anything else that I could help to make that pharmacy.
How does that relate to what you're doing today?
I really, even to today, you're in a startup, you're jumping in, you're doing what you need to do to get that company lifted and to round out the team and to deliver, the satisfaction to your customers.
John?
Joe, you told us earlier that golf was a big part of your life and you were self-taught. Golf's a very tough sport to teach yourself. Can you make a correlation between self-teaching golf to how that translates to you building your business?
Well, I mean, you're learning every day, especially being a technology individual. It changes so rapidly. So you're constantly having to learn things. I think that really carried forward into my business life, learning to play golf.
Does that translate with the failure? I'm sorry, Herb. Does that translate with the many failures of golf early on? Does that translate as well?
Well, yeah. I mean, I could tell you about the failures I've had along the way of trying things that didn't quite work. So I was ready for it, and I continue to fail at golf. So things haven't changed very much.
Daly?
All right, Joe. So, yeah, other than your family, who are your biggest, or your immediate family, mom and dad, who are your biggest influences in life?
Well, I use my grandmother all the time. You know, a woman back in the 40s who was divorced with 3 children of her own, went out to work. And I watched that carry through as an only child. She also was part of the fabric of raising me because both my parents worked.
So any specifics about your grandmother that you can bring to?
Nonstop, always doing the right thing. And I can remember her with a 16-ounce bottle of beer after school saying, now it's time for me to enjoy the rest of my evening. So that was a balance that she brought to my life, too.
Mm-hmm. Frank?
Joe, let's go back to your teenage years, hanging out with friends. How did you fit in? What was your role?
I guess I organized. And again, I went back to the ping pong table. Folks gathered. And then from there, we launched into doing something.
Okay, can you give me a more specific example?
Yeah, as things would go. You know, not leading to trouble, but leading to fun. So I got to be careful there. But it was always something that resulted in, okay, from ping pong to bowling, from ping pong to, you know, another friend's house to, you know, gather more.
So
to just
organizing. So organizing your friends and activities, does that have anything to do with your role as a CEO or entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm doing. I mean, also being a consultant as well, kind of in the fabric, always organizing, always planning, and always trying to get the right things done at the right time. And that's kind of what wired me.
So earlier you mentioned you were with a large company when you left to co-found Enable in 2002. Where did you get that courage from?
Well, yeah, part of it was, I guess, personal experiences. I survived cancer and kind of fought my way through that with tremendous support from my family and friends. Said, you know what, you can always find a job. That's always been my mindset. I can always find a job.
And tell us more about that experience and what it meant to you to be where you are today after taking that leap of faith.
Yeah, I mean, facing what I was facing versus facing not making a payroll, guess what? Really not a big deal. I hate to say it that way, but that's kind of the way I had to live my life and kind of drive the company, and it's worked.
Joe, what did you learn from your cancer that has anything to do with you building this business and anything to do with who you are nowadays?
Well, you know, I think part of it was when you meet your doctor and you believe your doctor and the outcome is exactly what they said. So at the same time, too, when I find a particular area of interest and I believe in it and I deliver that belief message to everyone else, you tend to try to drive to that. And when it happens, it only makes that team grow and a company grow. So that relationship was really important. And my doctor was a really important part of my life and still is to this day.
Wow. Matthew?
I want to go back to the ping pong table, Joe. You're an only child with a ping pong table in the house. Who bought the ping pong table?
My father.
Why?
My father did.
Why?
Well, it tended to be, as again, a large Italian family, and I happen to be an only child. We like to compete, so he wanted to find something that he could actually try to beat me at after dinner, and that's where it started. So it was he and I initially.
Did you reach a point where you beat him?
Maybe in the second or third attempt.
How'd that make you
really
feel?
frustrated him. It really frustrated him. And you know, he was about 5'2", so he still scares me when I think back on what that did to him.
And where did you get the other kids to play ping pong with you? How'd they show up?
Well, I mean, back then, I grew up in Delaware County, kind of a walking neighborhood. So we all were on the same bus in the morning, and then we all started to talk about what was going to happen after school. And it tended to be I was the lucky one to have room for a ping pong table, and we started to gather.
And tell me about that. How'd you organize the kids when you brought them in? You have ping pong tournaments?
Yeah, ultimately, but I was the first. I was always the first person up, so I wanted to take on the new person that came into the group. So we started there, and then from that, we sort of organized the tournament. So I was the first game.
Why take on the new person?
Like my 15-year-old dog with the new puppy in the house. It was my ping pong table. Right?
Jeffrey?
I wasn't going to let him in that easily.
So, Joe, it takes a lot of time to run a company. You have a lot of responsibilities, but you've spent some time teaching at Philly U and at Gwynedd Mercy. How did you get involved in teaching, and why did you go that route?
Well, there's part of me. I give back in service. Earlier, it was Red Cross and golf outings and such, and did a lot for the Red Cross. Then I wanted to actually help youth, and I'm like, hey, the technology disciplines in this area in schools, I wanted to expand, get involved in, and also those schools were convenient, quite honestly, in terms of my commutes and travels. So I ended up teaching at both those schools.
What did you learn? What did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, what did you learn from teaching?
Well, teaching for me is no different than teaching anyone and anything, right? One of the things I did learn is the difficulty and the challenges of advancing the youth and getting them to understand and believe and appreciate what interest and depth, it's building versus buying or building versus not building. The building is important. And that was something that's, continues to be part of my life, build and expand that to others.
What is the website address for Enable Consulting?
It's enableconsulting.com.
How do you spell that?
ENABLE consulting.com.
We've been speaking with Mr. Joe Cellucci, CEO and Managing Partner of Enable Consulting here on Executive Leaders Radio. Don't forget to visit our website. It's executiveleadersradio.com. That's executiveleadersradio.com to learn more about our executive leaders. And we'll be back in a moment right after this break. Stick around. Don't go away. executiveleadersradio.com. Recognize your deserving business advisors on our nation's leading Business with Heart radio show, Executive Leaders Radio. Yes, you can recognize your deserving business advisors on our nation's leading Business with Heart radio show, executiveleadersradio.com. Simply visit executiveleadersradio.com, securely enter their info, and we'll reach out to spotlight your deserving business advisors on our nation's leading Business with Heart radio show, executiveleadersradio.com. Don't wait. This radio and online social media and search engine exposure is quite valuable. Yes, this radio and online social media and search engine exposure is quite valuable to your business advisors who deserve to be recognized. Visit executiveleadersradio.com now to nominate your deserving business advisors for free exposure. We're back. You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio, and this is your host, Herb Cohen. I'd like to introduce Rick Skidmore, President and CEO of Timberlane. What is Timberlane?
So Timberlane makes custom window shutters and doors for historic properties and private residences.
Give me an idea of some interesting stuff you've done.
We've done thousands of properties, including hundreds of national landmarks across the country. We've done movie set work for Disney and Broadway. We put shutters on the Haunted Mansion in Disney World. We've even done one of the buildings on the White House complex.
Drew?
Yeah, Rick, you were an entrepreneur early on. What kind of things were you doing?
I was doing anything I could to make money. So I think my earliest recollection was picking flowers, which turned out to be weeds, wrapping tinfoil around them and standing on a corner at the bus stop. And as people were coming off, trying to sell them bouquets of flowers.
Why did you want to earn money at a young age?
I don't know. I think it might have something to do with growing up in a kind of a working class blue collar family, seeing my parents just working super hard, multiple jobs, and just always having a sensitivity around money.
John?
Rick, you told us earlier you're the oldest of 5 siblings. What was your role as the oldest child within the family, and can you translate or correlate that to being a business leader today?
Yeah, I think, the blessing and the curse of being a firstborn is that you have to blaze the trail and kind of break your parents in, and firstborn usually have it a little harder than folks downline from that. I also have a special needs sister who's 11 months younger, and between my parents' kind of work schedules and just the craziness of having 5 kids, I always kind of felt the responsibility of stepping up into some type of a leadership role, which I think has carried forward into my adult life and my role as a leader.
So, Rick, you founded Timberlane 25 years ago and have grown this organization. When we were talking about the company, you mentioned the word purpose. What do you mean by purpose, and why are you doing this?
So, my dad is a master woodworker, a very talented woodworker, and as I became a young adult, I started to kind of understand that there was kind of a negative bias around working with your hands and blue collar jobs. And I just never really understood that because I always looked up to my father. So I think what's happened, it's shaped my view of aligning or said differently, just making sure that people understand that skilled trades are important.
And when you walk in the door at Timberlane and you look over your field of people and they're working, how do you feel? How does it make you feel today?
Tremendous sense of pride.
Daley?
When you were younger, what sports did you play?
I never played sports. I was actually never on a team. And I think a lot of that comes back to the fact that my household and my parents weren't into it personally, so I never saw that influence.
So your family was a big influence. Give us some specifics about that.
Yeah, so I think between, the fact that my parents worked a lot, there were 5 kids, our social circle outside of, possibly grandparents and aunts and uncles wasn't very large, right? So I think my family had a tremendous impact and helped shape who I am, and that was my nucleus.
Frank?
So at Timberlane, you talk about creating extraordinary moments. What are the moments that stand out most as a teenager?
I think it would have to be just watching my parents kind of navigate the process of building a family and paying for everything and dealing with a special needs child and just just really managing that balancing act.
So your sister, and I think she was intellectually challenged, what struggles did you notice she observed, or what did you observe that she had?
Yeah, so I noticed, I had a standout moment when I was about 15. My sister Tina loved McDonald's. That was her big thing, right? So I walked from my house to McDonald's, and I remember when we were in line, she was just getting very excited about ordering, her meal, and there was 3 or 4 kids behind us in line that started to make fun of her. And I remember just getting furious about that because she was my sister. I was looking out for her. And I just remember that just imprinted in my mind, just the need to have compassion for those that are less fortunate than us.
How's that helping you build this business?
So I think that we take chances on employee hires that may be in a higher risk group that the majority of employers might pass on. And, I'm highly intuitive, and a lot of folks on my team are intuitive. So if we see something in somebody and we feel we can build on that, we'll take a chance.
Mr. Wiley?
Do you have anything that you've focused on instilling in your boys that you'd mentioned in the green room? Yeah, I think that, there's a lot of values that are important to me that I've tried to carry forward as a father, one of which, of course, is work ethic. The other is to take chances and to move out of your comfort zone. I think that's really where life is lived, and my boys have watched me as they've grown up. So I'm constantly pushing them to take risks in their own lives and just to do things differently.
Mr. Stefano?
So you've mentioned the term working class, blue collar, and work ethic a couple times in this conversation. Well, what does that mean to you? What do those terms mean to you? How does that drive you today on a daily basis for your business?
So we make stuff, right? And I worked early in my career before I started the business in more of an intellectual industry and investments and finance and insurance. And one of the things that I just could never connect with is I was dealing in intangibles, right? So I wanted a business that actually made something that you could step back and see, right? And so there's a tremendous sense of pride around that. And, you know, and when you make stuff, there's an attachment to kind of blue collar and artisans and people that work with their hands. So that's just something that's deeply ingrained in who I am.
And how does that make you feel? What positive attributes do you get from that, and how do you translate that to your kids?
So, it gives me a strong sense of pride. We've hired countless people that, we've taken right out of Votech school that were very green, and we gave them an opportunity. We helped mold them. We helped train them. And there's some of our rock stars today in leadership roles in the business. And, I'm a big believer in leading by example, right? So I think my boys hopefully have seen, lots of examples along the way where I've, it's not just words, but I backed it up with actions that had a positive result.
Shannon?
Rick, who was someone outside of your immediate family that you looked up to as a kid?
So as I mentioned before, my immediate family was kind of my nucleus, and we didn't have a super large circle. But, I would say that I wasn't necessarily a kid, but I'd say one of the early mentors I had was early in my career. And he also encouraged me to kind of take risks and kind of move out of my comfort zone. And most importantly, believe in myself.
And what does having that close-knit family, how does that impact the way you're building your team today?
So we're I'd like to think that our culture and our organization is also very, very tight knit. I mean, we're very strong on culture and the human connection and compassion, and just making sure that everybody understands that they're an important part of a much bigger wheel.
Matthew?
Rick, you told us about going to McDonald's with your sister Tina when you were 15. I'm curious, how young were you when you started looking out for your sister?
The honest answer is I don't really remember. I know I was young. I mean,
how did you learn that was your job?
So my sister also, on top of being intellectually challenged, she also has a host of medical conditions, and she would routinely take grand mal seizures. And so I kind of grew up seeing the EMT showing up to our house, after a seizure. And, I learned CPR when I was, 12 or 13 years old. And there were a few incidences where, she crashed and, my dad was working a second job and wasn't around. So I kind of had to step up and kind of keep my mother calm and just do what has to be done. Right.
Did anyone ever ask you to do that stuff?
No, it was just intuitive to me.
What was intuitive to you?
To just step up, right? When you see something that requires attention and it's important and somebody else is suffering, you just, I don't know, it's just kind of a natural force. I just move towards
What's that have to do with building this well-recognized national business, Timberlane?
I'm sorry, Herb, what does it have to do
with? What is that ability of yours, that characteristic of yours, just being willing to step up? What's that have to do with you building this substantial business?
So I think part of our job as leaders is to create a vision and then rally our teams around it, right? And I think you almost have to break it down three-dimensionally so that they can see something that doesn't exist yet. And I think that's our primary job as leaders, is to really, kind of paint a picture of a future that doesn't exist yet.
Thank you, Matthew. What's the website address of Timberlane?
It's timberlane.com.
Spell that, please.
TIMBERLANE.com.
We've been speaking with Rick Skidmore, President and CEO of Timberlane, here on Executive Leaders Radio. Jeffrey, can you give us a rundown on who we've had the opportunity of hanging out with today?
Here we had Bob Waller, President and CEO of Association Headquarters, Yasmine Mustafa, CEO and co-founder of Roar for Good, Joe Cellucci, CEO, Managing Partner, Enable Consulting, and Rick Skidmore, President and CEO of Timberlane.
I would like to thank my co-hosts, including Jeff Mack and Shannon Lane from Newmark Knight Frank, Drew Hanlon, Matthew Shapiro Obermeyer, Mr. Frank Hennessy, Premier Planning, Daly Tipton, Evolution Energy Partners, Mike Stefano Stack, Mike Wiley, Chain Solutions, and John Seitz, Mayo Sites, for giving me a hand structuring the questions, hopefully providing our listening audience an educational and entertaining show. I'd like to thank our listening audience for listening. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a radio show. Don't forget to visit our website, executiveleadersradio.com. To learn more about our executive leaders, thank you for joining us today, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.